"You're too dark for advertising," they said. 1 year later, she was on the cover of Vogue. What happens when a too dark intern dares to challenge the ivory towers of the ad industry? You won't believe how one photo shook fashion, justice, and everything in between. What came next redefined who gets to be called beautiful. If somebody had told Aaliyah West that her trouble would start the moment she helped an old woman pick up some fallen papers, she would have laughed, not out loud. More the kind of laugh that bubbles just beneath the throat when life pulls another one of its tired tricks. Or maybe she would have just sighed, rolled her eyes, and gone on about her day. Because when you're a young black woman in a world that still flinches at your skin tone, you learn real quick that kindness doesn't come with armor, and good intentions don't come with hazard pay. It was Monday. Of course it was. The kind of gray, chilly Manhattan Monday that makes you question every decision that led you into corporate America. Fifth day of her internship at LUX. One of those glittery advertising agencies where the walls are all glass, the people smell like imported citrus, and everything's designed to look like no one sweats. The kind of place where black folks existed mostly in mood boards and hypothetical diversity initiatives. Aaliyah was walking down the corridor, clipboard in hand, heels just a half size too tight, skirt from a secondhand store, and blazer a bit too aspiring for the room, when she saw Miss Mason, the office cleaner, drop a stack of campaign briefs. Her hands trembled from arthritis, and the papers scattered like fall leaves in a subway tunnel. Aaliyah didn't think. She just dropped to her knees and started helping. Real quick, real quiet. No applause, no hashtags, just decency. And then, click. A test shot went off in the next room. Some junior assistant had set up the camera early for a client shoot. The lens caught the moment. Aaliyah kneeling, smiling gently as she handed a paper back to Miss Mason, who looked at her like she was the first kind face she'd seen all morning. That photo would never make it into a portfolio. Not in that agency. Not in that moment. In the corner of the sleek, steel-trimmed studio, the monitor flickered with the image. And then came the voice. "Who's that?" "The intern, Aaliyah West. Get rid of it. That shot's ruined. It's too heavy, too dark. The light can't even find her." Let's be clear. They weren't talking about exposure settings. Aaliyah heard it all. Maybe not every word, but enough. Enough for the chill to run down her spine. Not cold, but familiar. A heatless burn that came from decades of coded language and polite exclusions. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She knew weakness in places like this cost more than a paycheck. It cost dignity. An hour later, she got the email. "We've reviewed your position, and unfortunately, the role is being reevaluated." Never mind that she was just an intern. Never mind that they'd said she had potential. In corporate translation, it read loud and clear. "You don't shine right in our light." So she walked out into the rain. Manhattan in March doesn't offer comfort, just puddles and cold shoulders. Donny Hathaway played in her headphones, but even his voice couldn't warm the street that day. She skipped the train, walked, let her shoes soak, let the weight of it all settle. Too dark, she'd heard it before. At the high school yearbook shoot, when the photographer told her to stand a little further back because the lighting needed to breathe. In college, when her professor smiled and suggested she do her art thesis on African aesthetics instead of environmental design, her actual focus. At the department store, when security tracked her through every aisle but called it routine observation. By the time she got home, she was dripping from the scalp down to her socks. She changed into sweatpants, pulled out her beat-up laptop, and clicked through her oldest folder. Hundreds of photos. Not staged, not glossy. Real people. Her brother playing ball in the park, her mother braiding hair on the porch, kids hopping over sidewalk cracks like lava. Faces the world never quite knew what to do with. She opened Instagram and created a new account at Darkloom. The name wasn't just clever, it was rebellion. Darkness didn't hide, she decided. It revealed. She uploaded her first post. A woman asleep on the train, head resting on a plastic grocery bag, then a boy splashing through puddles, then a man reading Baldwin on a park bench. Raw, untouched. No filters, no smiles begged for. By the end of the third day, 289 followers. A week later, over 1,000, and comments, real ones. "This is me. My mama used to stand like that at the stove. You made us look human, not marketable, just human." Something shifted, and Aaliyah felt it. She sent her portfolio, now updated with street portraits, to the organizers of the True Faces Project, an annual street photography exhibit in Harlem. The curator, Tony Brooks, called her the next day. Deep voice, Harlem baritone. "You shot that Subway series?" "Yes, sir." "Girl, that's blues. Not music, vision." He gave her 5 slots in the show. She picked her favorites, the ones that told the truth without asking for permission. One in particular, her friend Keisha, standing under a flickering street lamp, face half lit, half shadowed. She captioned it, "I don't darken the frame, I am the light." The morning the show opened, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard paused in front of that photo. Didn't say a word for 2 full minutes. Then he turned to her. "You take this?" "Yeah, this ain't advertising. This is something deeper. Want a job?" His name was Mario Lenz, part Italian, part Brooklyn, full-on icon in the underground art world. He ran visual campaigns for Vogue, the rebellious cousin to mainstream fashion media, and now he wanted her on his next project. The next day she showed up. No lipstick, no heels, just jeans, a t-shirt, and her cannon. The room was full of people like her, artists who'd had to bite their tongues in meetings, soften their edge, bleach their voice for acceptance. The project was called Raw Realities, and it wasn't asking for permission. Within 4 days of the launch, one of her portraits leaked online, not from her page, but from a private LUX group chat. Someone from the agency had stolen the image and posted it with the caption, "Now you see why shadows don't belong in front of the lens." Halloween came early. It spread fast. TikTokers mocked it. Instagram flooded with fake recreations. White kids contouring their faces, mimicking sad black art. Comments turned ugly. DMs turned vile. Even the models in her shoot began receiving harassment. Aaliyah sat in a cafe that Friday, staring into her untouched coffee like it might give her advice. She was numb. Not because she hadn't expected backlash, but because she was sick of always having to. And then, right on cue, the cafe door slammed open. In walked Emily Sharp. Same coat, same power walk, same ice-cold posture. "Aaliyah," she said, as if she hadn't tossed her into the corporate trash just days ago. "I saw your project." "Yeah, I know. You said I blocked the light, remember?" "I was wrong. We have a client looking for something real, something current. We could use you. If you're willing to tone it down, make it a little more digestible." Aaliyah looked at her for a long second, then reached for her camera. Click. No flash, no posing, just truth. Because truth doesn't need editing, and it sure doesn't need permission. The photo? It hung the next week in the center of her new pop-up show. Caption read, "This is what fear looks like when it realizes it no longer owns the frame." 3 days. That was all it took for the advertising world, accustomed to powdering faces and sterilizing truth, to react to Aaliyah West's Raw Realities project like it had just spat in the ivory towers of their sanitized domain. Images of black women, untouched by retouching, posing, or gloss, were not nude, but they were naked in a way that exposed the bare bones of lived experience. And who was behind it? An intern. The very same one they once called that blotch in the frame. By midnight on that third day, the glossy corridors of LUX were in full-blown panic mode. Glossy-faced executives pacing like caged lions, partners dialing up in urgent waves, demanding answers. Why wasn't this discovered by us? Why did we let this happen on our watch? And there, caught in the crossfire of shame and rage, was Emily Sharp, crumbling under the weight of her own arrogance, scrambling to call an emergency meeting with the sole agenda. How did we miss the Afro trend blaring right in our face? Meanwhile, in a parallel universe of unfiltered humanity, one photograph rose above the noise. A portrait of a pregnant black woman set against graffiti that screamed, "God ain't white," hands resting gently on her belly, eyes holding the world in that moment of creation. That image went viral faster than a rumor in Sunday service, shares multiplying like rising bread dough, splashing across CNN headlines, the Washington Post homepage, and even catching the attention of Rihanna's feed. And then, the ping that made Aaliyah's heart collide with her ribs, a direct message from Vogue UK. "We want to interview you. We may feature your image in a piece about new visual ethics." "I am not a visual ethicist," Aaliyah replied, voice calm but hardened. "I just photograph people who refuse to hide from their own shadow." That should have been the end, the credits rolling over a quiet standing ovation. But Lux, after all, does not lose quietly. Later that evening, Aaliyah scrolled through Twitter and found her name trending under the hashtag #DarkLoomDrags. A wall of hot takes, half in fierce support, half dripping with bile. And the strangest part, many of the negative tweets were identical, as if churned out by corporate-run bots. One stood out. "That exhibit looks like an unemployment application in black and white. This is not art, this is pity porn." And that's when Aaliyah realized this whole thing was bigger than her. Her pictures had become the mirror people didn't want to look in, exposing what they hid behind polite smiles and coded compliments telling her, "Smile a little brighter." She called Mario Lenz. "We go deeper, harder." "Vogue wants a cover shoot," Mario said, voice steady. "Location, London." "No," she replied, firm. I shoot it here, on my street, in my light. Vogue agreed because they weren't blind. They'd seen where the momentum was headed, and they weren't slow enough to try and stand in its way. So the day of the shoot arrived. There were no strobes, no makeup team bending her model's features to corporate standards, just natural light, raw gut feeling, and Letitia, her subject, a mother of three, a nurse, skin bearing the hush of a cesarean scar, and eyes carrying more strength than any glossy campaign ever dared depict. Letitia looked into the lens and did not smile. She did not flinch with fear. She simply owned her space. Then 3 days later, Aaliyah spotted a thin envelope at her door. Her breath went cold. Lux had served her. A lawsuit, claims of defamation, tarnishing corporate reputation, misuse of insider images. In other words, they were suing her for truthfulness and for proving that honesty spread faster than their polished lies. Mario leaned back in his chair when she told him. "It's pressure," he said. "They aren't going to win. They just want to shut you up." Inside, Aaliyah felt a storm brewing. Not fear, not regret, but that deep, clenched knot of knowing that what she was doing was working. The system doesn't crumble when you obey. It trembles when you refuse to comply. Meanwhile, despite the legal storm, Vogue released the issue with Letitia's face on the cover, emblazoned with the tagline, "The new frame, light bends different on her." The reaction was seismic. The magazine sold out in 2 days. Subscriptions shot up 16% overnight. But more than numbers, more than buzz, thousands of letters poured in. Letters from grandmothers who once were told they were too much. Letters from teenagers who pressed the magazine to their chests and whispered, "Is that me?" And from ex-models who wrote, "They said I was too exotic once, but now I see the light in this frame, and it's the truth." Emboldened, Aaliyah decided to take things a step further. Her audacious move that left jaws dropping citywide. She purchased screen time on Times Square's biggest digital billboard, big enough for 3 city blocks to feel the weight of truth, and she funded it with the payment from Vogue, plus a bit of her own grit. She produced a 30-second reel, a cascade of portraits from raw realities, faces unfiltered, resilient. It closed with a piercing message. If we are too dark for your camera, maybe you need a new lens. On the day it played, commuters slammed on brakes, tourists gaped while snapping photos, couples held hands in the flickering glow, and one man dressed like he just stepped off a Wall Street elevator whispered, "This isn't art anymore. It's protest." And the next morning they summoned her back to court. Lux called it the final straw. And there, under fluorescent lights and sterile solemnity, sat Emily Sharp, hair perfect, face composed in that practiced freeze of corporate elitism, as if her personal faith hadn't taken a hit. The LUX Council began their speech. "Ms. West, you publicly disseminated content that damages our business reputation?" Aaliyah stood, calm but steely. "What damage? The damage you saw in my skin?" The courtroom stopped. "You claim no bias exists in your business. Then tell us, why are 98% of your models fair-skinned? Why did you drop a campaign in 2021 with a darker-skinned model, saying she didn't fit our brand standards?" Emily shifted. "We follow commercial criteria." "Those women in my photos," Aaliyah replied, voice unwavering, "I shot them on street corners, without stylists, without makeup. And know what? That series? It wasn't pity. You styled it. It was honesty. And your brand? Yours is filtered. Yours is photoshopped." The judge, an older black woman whose silence spoke volumes, nodded once. "Does the defense wish to add anything?" The lawyer fumbled, face going red, words falling flat. 3 days later, the court dismissed the lawsuit outright. The written ruling read like a manifesto. Artistic freedom is a right, and if the truth makes you uncomfortable, perhaps the problem lies not with the truth. After the session ended, as cameras clicked and voices buzzed like excited bees, an elderly black woman in a wool coat shuffled forward. Her voice was soft. "I learned English in the 60s, she said. "They wouldn't let me into proper classes. Now your picture is on my granddaughter's bedroom wall. Thank you for showing her how she looks when no one is hiding her light." That's when Aaliyah let go of the line she'd been holding since day one, not out of pain, but because she'd finally seen the light she'd been illuminating for others. The morning that Vogue dropped its issue featuring Letitia's unretouched face on the cover was outwardly the kind of Tuesday that seems ordinary until you realize nothing in your life will ever feel that way again. The city hadn't fully woken yet, but digital newsstands were already groaning under the weight of the demand, as if a silent revolution had just pressed publish, revealing a black woman's visage unfiltered, unairbrushed, unashamed, staring right at the institution that had spent decades whispering too much shadow. Back in her modest apartment, Aaliyah sat with a steaming cup of black coffee. the aroma grounding her as she gazed out the window at a city that still thought it could dictate whose faces could speak loudly enough to matter. She wasn't silent because she lacked words, but because words had multiplied. Letters from strangers expressing gratitude for their reflection at last, some praising, some biting with hostility, none empty, and in that moment she realized that was the revolution. Not silence, but unrelenting noise. Meanwhile, in the sleek echo chambers of LUX, the tremor was real. Their sanctified visual doctrine had been upended, their unwavering aesthetic suddenly obsolete, and most humiliating of all was the message from a top-tier client who had pulled out last week, now calling back with a chorus of regret and craving. We need something like Darkloom. Real. No plastic shine. Their system had failed, and they were panicking to rebrand in her wake. Instead of basking in that moment, Aaliyah made a calculated move. She announced the launch of her own creative agency, 2 Dark Studios, no penthouse offices, no prescribed suits, just lenses aligned with truth. A workshop where nobody would ever again be told to tone it down or lighten your presence. It was audacious and it was necessary. Her inaugural campaign was even more profound. A visual scholarship trust for emerging Black photographers, funded by her magazine sales and interview proceeds, simply titled Back in the Frame, bringing others back into the photographic narrative that had long ignored them. But fate has a way of timing pulse-pounding drama. That very morning her doorbell rang, and on her stoop stood a man with a name tag pinned near his expensive tie and a face wearing disdain. Ms. West, Arthur Evans. I represent the legal interests of LUX. Ever sarcastic, she greeted him with, and how are those moral interests doing these days? Still breathing? He slid across a stack of legal papers, LUX's latest lawsuit, this time alleging unauthorized use of trade likenesses and undermining competition, basically accusing her of running ahead too fast while they scrambled in courtroom steps. Aaliyah chuckled, voice low and fierce. I just photographed the street, Mr. Evans. If you saw your logos in those images, maybe you've been looking too long from inside your ivory towers. The trial that followed was a spectacle stubbornly reminiscent of old media melodrama, packed with reporters, civil rights activists, photographers in hoodies, former ad execs in pleated slacks, and standing before that crowd was Aaliyah on one side and LUX's legal army on the other. Emily Sharp sat again in semifinal rows, exquisitely coiffed, wearing that look that says, "This is beneath me, but I have to be present." The room buzzed, but the air smelled of accountability. Taking the podium, Aaliyah didn't need sheets of notes, just conviction. She began, voice steady but emotional. Your Honor, I was taught to be polite, to listen before speaking, to smile when confrontation hurts, to be thankful for any seat at the table. But at some point, I learned, if you're grateful just for being unseen, you aren't living. You're disappearing, and I am tired of disappearing. A hush fell. The LUX lawyer shuffled papers and tried citing unwritten ethical standards for competitive framing in visual space. But the judge, an older Black woman whose years had carved wisdom into her expression, raised an eyebrow. We are not gathered here for lectures on aesthetics. Prove Miss West broke the law, not your fragile ego. And in that electric moment, Aaliyah unveiled the final piece of her evidence. The courtroom dipped into silence as she placed a framed photo on the stand. Emily Sharp, caught unaware in that cafe meeting, her features tense, her eyes flickering uncertainty. Not nastiness, but fear. The fear that the facade she sold was cracking. No insult, no ridicule, just simple truth. The moment guilt acknowledged reality. That single frame broke the trial. Attorneys sputtered. Emily shifted uncomfortably. The judge nodded again in acknowledgement. 3 days later, the court dismissed LUX's claim with a resounding statement. Art does not violate boundaries, it reveals where they existed. Soon after the ruling, Aaliyah was invited onto a studio talk show to discuss the new visual revolution. Cameras rolled in a space full of designers with rolled-up sleeves, models whose once muted identities had found harmony, and producers whose exhalations sounded like relief. The host asked the question dangling in the air, Aaliyah, you made the impossible happen. What next? She paused, tired but unbowed, then smiled, knowing the gravity of her response. I didn't do the impossible. I just stopped disappearing, and that turned out to be enough. Her journey that evening didn't end under studio lights. She left for Brooklyn that night, not back to her smart apartment, but to her mother's house in Brownsville, where a proud woman once warned her child, "Your dark is chocolate and beautiful, but be careful. People are afraid of what they can't bleach." Over the kitchen table, they shared boiled plantains, that sweet nostalgia of home, while Nina Simone's vinyl spun in the background. Her mother, eyes soft with relief and pride, touched the magazine's cover and whispered, "Never thought I'd live to see this day." And Aaliyah touched her mother's hand and said simply, "Neither did I, but here we are. We're in the frame, Mama, and now we hold the focus." In that tiny kitchen, amidst warm smiles and stirring memories, Aaliyah realized that victory wasn't about rejection letters or court wins. It was about claiming space and giving back. Two dark studios would grow. Back in the Frame would inspire, and each photograph would whisper to the world, "Your lens is too small if you're still afraid of shadow." That ordinary Tuesday had, in truth, rewritten the rules. And now, as they listened to Simone croon, "Feeling good," the story was just beginning.